It dates well before 1915 when the base became a base. It was where all the locals were buried. A lot of the blacks were buried here.
A lot of the former slaves came back to familiar territory. And of course the Freedmen's Bureau had a lot of land, set up initially for the free blacks that came back, and the former slaves that came back being freed at that time.
The ruins of their old churches and cemeteries became Navy property in 1918. Cheesecake Cemetery, associated with St. John's Baptist Church, is at Yorktown Naval Weapons Station. Its name comes from a mispronunciation.
That's a corruption of Kiskiak, the Indian tribe Kiskiak, and it was, corrupted and finally became Cheesecake over the years.
It is at this cemetery that a former James City County slave turned Civil War hero disappeared into an unmarked grave.
We discovered that Edward Radcliffe is buried in this cemetery. A member of the 38th United States Colored Troop. He won a Medal of Honor for battle up at Chapin's Farm in Richmond, and after the war he came back and lived in this area and was a farmer. He died of tuberculosis according to the death certificate in March of 1915.
Along with others, Kemp filed for an official military headstone and decided that simply installing the stone for the Medal of Honor recipient wouldn't be enough. So he set about scheduling a memorial service.
And we're going to plan a reenactment ceremony up here. We've contacted the reenactors from the 38th United States Colored Troops out of Richmond, along with local reenactors out of here, and we found family members live in this area, Williamsburg, Newport News, and they're excited about it, of course.
Everyone in the family knew of their ancestors' medal, but no one had been to the cemetery in decades, partly because of security restrictions on the base.
We have 18 family members from Pennsylvania coming down, we know of, and we have some more in Baltimore, in the Baltimore area, that'll be coming down.
There may have been bitter days after the Civil War, but for Medal of Honor recipient Edward Radcliffe, there was at least a homecoming and freedom with his wife and family.
The Freedmen's Bureau had a lot of land, set up initially for the free blacks that came back, and the former slaves that came back being freed at that time.
Edward Radcliffe, his wife Grace, and daughter Hannah followed other black families and some Native American Indians to a small community on the York River just down the banks from Yorktown. It came to be called the reservation.
When he came back after the war, the black community was a pretty closeted community also. I mean, you didn't have free movement to that extent, they all lived out on what was called the reservation.
According to the U.S. Census of 1870, 48% of the black men in York County were farmers. Edward returned to farming. It was what he knew. They planted a variety of crops and hunted, fished, and harvested oysters on the York River. Old Williamsburg Road bisected the region then.
Old Williamsburg Road runs from Williamsburg to Yorktown. George Washington marched his troops down that road to the battle in Yorktown to defeat the British, and it's the oldest road that's been in continuous use in the United States.
By the 1880s, Edward Radcliffe's health started to deteriorate. He petitioned the War Department for an invalid pension. They turned him down. In 1892, Radcliffe's doctor filed an affidavit saying that he did have a disability, rheumatism and failing eyesight. By 1895, the government finally agreed to pay him a pension of $6 a month. 10 years later, his pension increased to $12 because of a total inability to earn a support by manual labor. He died on March 10, 1915, at 80 years old. On March 11th, he was buried at the Cheesecake Cemetery outside St. John's Baptist Church. His children were probably at the burial. they might have laid tiny purple flowers on his grave, and they would have marked the spot with a tombstone made of wood.
Every man deserves, a sacred spot. And I think, to know where he or she is buried is very important from a genealogical standpoint, but also just from, care for human remains. Granted, we ultimately turn to dust, but nevertheless, that's a sacred spot, even if the dust is what's left.
And that is just what the effort to honor Civil War Union hero Edward Radcliffe is all about, marking his sacred spot. Edward Radcliffe was buried here in 1915, his grave marked with a wooden tombstone. After the Navy bought the land in Yorktown in 1918, the cemetery became all but impossible to visit. With no one to care for it, the wooden marker deteriorated, leaving Radcliffe's grave unmarked. Born a slave on a farm in James City, Radcliffe had enlisted in the Union Army and fought in the Civil War. He was the first Union enlisted man to set foot inside Confederate fortifications in the battle for Richmond. For his actions in that battle, he became one of only 16 black men to earn a Medal of Honor during the Civil War. Radcliffe's gravesite will be designated with an official military tombstone and an elaborate private ceremony.
He was a slave here in James City County, ended up fighting with the Union, and really that he received the Medal of Honor. I think that's very significant, that he came from the background that he came from and ended up fighting to the extent that he received this Medal of Honor. That's great.
Yorktown Naval Weapons Station Public Affairs Officer Jim Kemp has planned for the reenactment group of the 38th Regiment of the U.S. Colored Troops, the unit that Radcliffe served with, to attend. The Civil War soldier's grandson, Edward Radcliffe, will be there, and the tiny purple flowers some historians say were left at the heads of graves to return each year as nature's marker are there, along with the Civil War hero's enduring mark. Edward Radcliffe, Medal of Honor, Sergeant Major Company C, 38th United States Colored Troops, February 8, 1835 to March 10, 1915.
I think this whole effort is one that's going to bring all of us greater awareness of really what the Civil War was all about. There's still a lot of myths. We say it's the one war that we've never stopped fighting.